December 17th, 2015. I've just exited Antarctic waters. 0 degrees. I don't feel my arms or legs. I've outdone all of my shipmates by a factor of 10. I'm so disoriented by the intense cold that I wander Deception Island in my shorts, not realizing I have to get dressed. July 7th, 2013, Pamplona, Spain. I go for running of the bulls. I train for weeks, and I make it through the run perfectly safe and into the stadium, not realizing that once you're in the stadium, they let the bulls in one at a time to mess with the runners. And something like this happens to me. In my case, as the bull was entering the stadium, it jumped, missed its jump, and landed on my back. I thought I was paralyzed. I ended up in triage and an emergency room. Here, you can see me, delirious in pain with a hoof print embedded into my back. December 29th, 2016, Bali, Indonesia. I'm 40 feet underwater holding my breath, the CO2 filling up my lungs, causing intense convulsions. But instead of heading towards the surface, I continued into the depths. Now, you may ask yourself, why would any rational human being ever consider doing any of these things? And it wasn't to impress a woman. Well, maybe a little. It's because I'm a behavioral scientist, and among the things I study besides influence is what actually causes us to live fun, exciting, engaging, and fulfilling lives. I literally wrote a book about it called The 2 a.m. Principle, Discover the Science of Adventure. And if you were curious, no, I didn't enjoy any of those things. But that didn't mean that I didn't benefit from doing every single one of them. You see, I dedicated myself and my life to understanding what gives us a level of engagement. And I ended up discovering that every adventure follows a predictable 4-stage process, and each stage has specific characteristics that when you apply them, make life exciting. But to even begin to understand any of this, I have to explain what I mean by adventure. Because as I started the process to understand it, I realized there was no unifying definition. And so I had to invent one. And as I see it, an adventure is an experience that is, one, exciting and remarkable. For millennia, our species has passed down its knowledge through an oral history. And so if it's not worth remarking about or discussing, it's not culturally significant. 2, it has to possess adversity and or risk, preferably perceived risk. I know that from experience. There's a huge difference between imminent peril and the experience or perception of risk. For example, skydiving, incredibly safe, versus, let's say, climbing Everest, which makes you about 2,222 times more likely to die climbing Everest than skydiving. Third characteristic, it brings about growth. The person you are at the end is fundamentally different than the person who started. If you look at any great hero or heroine's journey, you'll notice that they're fundamentally changed by the experience. And here's the really important thing. Long past the time that your wild stories and antics have been forgotten and the stories fade, you will have left with an expanded capacity. You will have a greater comfort zone. You've either pushed yourself through physical, emotional, or social boundaries. Now, as I was doing all of this research, trying to understand what really causes us to engage in life, I came across a brilliant researcher that many of you may know. His name is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. He's a psychologist who, for decades, searched for and interviewed top performers across every field. He wanted to understand peak human performance. So he found rock climbers and business people, artists and musicians and dancers and athletes, and interviewed all of them. And overwhelmingly, he discovered something. There's a state of peak human performance that he labeled flow, that overwhelmingly all of them described. And it is this instant where you are fully engaged in whatever it is that you're doing. There's zero distance between you and the activity. It feels like you're one. It has an immediate value to you, and you feel like you're in a state of ecstasy. You lose all sense of self-consciousness. And so his curiosity was, how do we get to experience this level of flow or enjoyment of life on a consistent basis? Because the fact of the matter is, I didn't come to a health conference to talk about all my injuries, but rather, if we are healthy, what do we get to do now? How do I get to use this body that's now healthier and this mind that's more focused to enjoy and experience life at a better state? And what Csikszentmihalyi discovered was that human beings actually aren't most engaged when they're safe and secure, but rather when we are doing something that requires skill and that is outside of our skill set. So if it's too familiar, we get bored. But similarly, if it's too hard and we fail constantly, then we become self-conscious and we can't enter flow. Whatever we're doing has to give us an immediate and continuous feedback so that we can feel intertwined with the activity. It's essentially we're looking for this kind of optimal anxiety, the state where we are pursuing something that's outside of our skill set, but that we believe is attainable. And this is where adventure lives. Because we may not be able to become world-class musicians or famous artists, but we all have an experience of the skill set of being us, which means that we can all experience adventure because it's an individualized concept. I don't get to say what's adventurous for you, and you don't get to say what's adventurous for me. If you did, you probably wouldn't let me do any of those things that I do. And so here's the beauty of why I love this notion of flow state. It's available to anybody. We need to get rid of our distractions like cell phones and so on so we can focus. But it also opens us up to something that we know universally, that the magic in life occurs outside of our comfort zone when we're stretching for something. I think the author Shane Snow described it best when he gave the example of a child on a jungle gym. If you're going from bar to bar on a jungle gym, you need enough momentum to go from bar to the next. If they're too close, you can't build up momentum. And if they're too far apart, you'll fall. So if you've ever spoken to somebody who's just started a new job and you ask them how it's going, they say, "Oh my God, I love it." Why? Because I'm learning a lot. Or when you think back to those times at work that you were most engaged, or with your family, or when you were playing, it's not because it was easy, but rather because it was difficult yet attainable. And so there are people here who run huge companies, who have teams and staffs. So you have to ask yourself, am I making the experience of work and adventure? Am I allowing my employees to enter this flow state and really achieve satisfaction and engagement in the workplace? Because if anything that I've learned from years of getting injured, exploring the world, and from research by Csikszentmihalyi, it's that the magic in life occurs outside of our comfort zone. It's in the willingness to be uncomfortable. And so I guess if I'm saying anything, what I'm saying is, I hope you all have incredibly uncomfortable lives and enjoy all the adventures and magic that comes with it. Thank you.